Hey there, amazing friends. I warmly invite you to join me on this exciting journey by subscribing to my channel, liking, commenting, and sharing my videos. Every like, comment, and share brings us closer together and fuels my passion to create more great content. Your support truly makes all the difference. Thank you for being the heart of this community. The scream behind locked doors, inexplicable noises in the abandoned mansion. A stiff wind rustled the withered leaves strewn across the mossy driveway, stirring the darkness that gathered around the remains of Oakwood House. From the ornate iron gates, now rusted and hanging askew, to the sprawling silhouette of the old mansion looming beyond, everything about this place radiated an undeniable sense of desertion and quiet dread. Rumors floated among the locals of a haunting presence, of unearthly noises echoing through deserted halls each night, culminating in what some swore was an anguished scream. And then there were the doors, the countless locked doors scattered throughout the house that seemed to have no logical purpose, behind which something might stir or whimper or cry in the dead of night. Few dared to explore the estate beyond a hasty glance from the safety of the rusted gates. Yet for those with a thirst for the unknown, Oakwood House stood as a compelling riddle, a testament to time's decay and the possibility that some secrets are better left undiscovered. That is exactly how Eric found himself standing at the threshold on a late autumn afternoon, on the cusp of dusk, with the sun already dipping beneath the horizon. A local historian by trade and something of a mystery enthusiast by inclination, Eric had heard the stories from a local bartender while passing through the region. Tales of the once stately Oakwood House, built over a century ago by an eccentric shipping magnate named Ambrose Harlow, who apparently harbored secrets that even his own descendants never fully comprehended. The house had changed hands multiple times after Harlow's passing, each new owner staying only a short while before abruptly moving out, leaving behind precious little reason beyond vague references to the noises and the feeling that something was wrong. Eventually, no buyer stepped forward, and the estate fell into legal limbo, slowly surrendering to ivy, rot, and the murk of rumor. Yet some nights, passers-by claimed, light flickered behind grimy windows, or shapes flitted across the second-story balcony, and always the same hair-raising, inexplicable cry in the late hours, a scream from behind locked doors, echoing through the corridors. Determined to separate fact from folklore, Eric stepped forward, pushing open the gate. The hinges shrieked in protest, and he made his way up a driveway lined with dead hydrangeas and stunted hedges that had long ceased to be pruned. Above him rose the mansion's facade, once regal, now battered. Its windows seemed vacant, black holes in the pale stone walls, the shutters askew or missing altogether. A large double door, carved with an ornate leaf motif, stood at the top of a short flight of steps. Weeds snaked between the cracked stairs, seeming to bar the path. With each footstep, Eric felt as though he approached something not just physically decaying, but actively repelling human presence. He paused at the threshold. A faint chill slithered across his skin, even though the evening air was hardly that cold. The door gave way with minimal force, the lock apparently broken or rusted out over time. The musty stench inside wrapped around him immediately, a mixture of dust, mold, and the peculiar odor of old furniture left to rot. He flipped on the powerful flashlight had brought. In the wide foyer, tarnished chandeliers hung overhead, their crystals fractured or missing. The floor was a sea of footprints left in dust, many overlapping from unknown visitors who came before. Some sets of footprints vanished abruptly, as though their makers turned back or meandered off to a side corridor. Eric's heart quickened a little. He advanced, calling out a tentative hello, less an expectation of answer than a routine courtesy in exploring presumably empty places. His voice dissolved into the gloom, stirring motes of dust in the stale air. Had read in local archives that Ambrose Harlow had been known for his labyrinthine interior design, installing an array of hidden passageways and peculiar locked rooms for reasons he never divulged. One rumor said Harlow had been superstitious, and each locked door was meant to imprison a spirit. Another rumor suggested he was a collector of bizarre artifacts, storing them behind specially reinforced doors so no intruder or prying family member could discover them. Eric had half dismissed these tales as typical local color, until the bartender insisted that multiple visitors had found doors that could not be forced open, from behind which inexplicable scratching or tapping had been heard. More than once, the rumor said passersby heard a faint moan or whisper. But the most haunting detail was the repeated claim of a scream at certain hours, a high, inhuman wail that ricocheted through the halls. Sometimes it seemed close, other times distant. Some believed it was an echo from an old tragedy, while others maintained it was living, that something or someone was trapped behind a locked door even to this day. The foyer branched off into multiple corridors, with a large double staircase curving up to the second floor. Painted in what must once have been pastel green, the walls were now peeling to reveal plaster and even older layers of wallpaper with floral patterns. Shadows danced on the edges of Eric's flashlight beam. He carefully advanced, noting the stillness that lay thick as fog. Even the typical noise of wildlife, rats scurrying, birds nesting, seemed absent. For an instant, Eric thought he saw movement at the top of the stairs, a fleeting silhouette of a figure peering down at him. He panned the flashlight upward, finding only emptiness, the banister lined with dust. Possibly his mind was playing tricks. He decided to begin a systematic exploration, hoping to document each accessible room. The main corridor to the left opened onto what might have been a parlor, the furnishings draped in dusty sheets. Another door led to a grand salon with a crumbling fireplace. The chandeliers overhead threatened to dislodge at the slightest tremor. A strong stale odor permeated everything, intensifying as he stepped deeper into the structure. Yet none of these rooms contained anything especially noteworthy, just standard vestiges of an abandoned home, rotted curtains, broken chairs, scattered debris from looters or squatters. Feeling mildly disappointed, Eric pressed on, climbing the main staircase to the second floor. There, he found multiple locked doors along a wide hallway. At a quick jiggle of each doorknob, none budged. No typical keyholes either, just old-fashioned locks that seemed partially rusted shut. The arrangement of these locked doors felt almost symmetrical, as though each door opposed another across the corridor. The effect was unsettling, reminiscent of a hotel hallway, except each door was in disrepair, the paint chipped, doorknobs tarnished. Without a crowbar or specialized tools, forcing them open would be a challenge. Eric made a mental note to see if any keys might be found in the caretaker's quarters or the basement, if such a place existed. As he approached the final locked door at the corridor's end, an odd feeling overcame him, a sense of pressure in his ears, as if the air grew heavier. The doorknob was immovable. He leaned in, placing an ear near the wood. At first, only the sound of his own pulse. Then, faintly, he heard something. A distant hush, or perhaps the echo of a breath. He froze, straining to confirm if it was real. Then an abrupt vibration traveled through the wood, like something on the other side had tapped or bumped the door from within. Startled, Eric staggered back, heart pounding. He forced a rational explanation, maybe old pipes or a trick of acoustics. But goosebumps rose on his arms. That intangible brush of dread told him something was indeed there. He quickly retreated, deciding to investigate other parts of the mansion first. A part of him wanted to leave outright, but curiosity drove him to find more conclusive evidence about the rumored screams. He discovered a side corridor leading to a smaller set of stairs that presumably went to the third floor or attic. The steps here were narrower, the walls closer, giving it a claustrophobic vibe. Halfway up in the flashlight beam, he spotted another locked door on the landing. This one looked especially sturdy, reinforced with what seemed like iron brackets. Painted black, it displayed a series of faint carvings. They might have been stylized vines or symbols, hard to tell under the thick dust. A sense of negative energy emanated from it, if such a thing was possible. Eric tested the handle, met with immediate resistance. As he stepped away, a muffled clang from within startled him. He froze, expecting perhaps an echo. A swirl of panic flickered inside him. But the clang did not repeat. Summoning nerve, he pressed an ear to the door. Silence! Still, that single clang felt purposeful, as though something behind that door had responded to his attempt. He decided not to linger, continuing up to the top. The attic proved a low-ceilinged space crammed with crates, chests, dusty furniture, and old trunks labeled with faded shipping stencils. A single broken window let in the last rays of dusk. The rafters overhead were riddled with cobwebs. He rummaged through a few trunks, finding mostly moth-eaten clothes, old newspapers, and personal mementos from the Harlow family, diaries with faded ink, shipping ledgers, an album of black and white photos. One diary from Ambrose Harlow himself contained scattered references to expansions and renovations. The new corridor is complete. Doors installed. Each lock tested. The designs ensure secrecy. Another cryptic line read, "The echoes at night remain. The locked spaces hold them at bay, but their presence grows. The caretaker warns me of moans. Nonsense or something more. That only deepened the puzzle. It indicated that the locked doors might have been purposeful, not random. Yet the mention of moans or echoes hinted that even Harlow faced the inexplicable phenomena. Perhaps, Eric surmised, those locked doors contained something intangible he tried to seal away. Or maybe they were a misguided solution to quell haunting events that predated the house. Another line in the diary. If the night screams intensify, the seal is compromised. Must ensure no occupant can wander. That was the final entry before the writing abruptly ended. Shivers traced down Eric's spine. He recognized the correlation with local rumors of shrieking in the night. Returning from the attic, Eric took a circuitous route along a second-floor corridor to find the library or study, common in such older estates. Indeed, a large double door, not locked, opened onto a chamber lined with shelves. The heavy odor of decaying paper was thick, and though many books had rotted or were eaten by insects, some volumes survived. Flicking his flashlight along the spines, he saw mostly classical literature, treatises on shipping trade, and a few volumes of local history. Then, near a corner, he found a locked glass cabinet. Inside sat a thick ledger with an elaborate clasp. The glass door was not secured, so he opened it, retrieving the ledger. It bore no title, just a worn leather cover. Inside, pages were covered in a careful script that described noises documented Wing B, strange illusions, third corridor, locked door #7 moaning, and so forth. A caretaker's log, perhaps? The entries detailed sightings of ephemeral shapes at certain hours, hearing sobbing behind door #4, or footsteps behind door #9. The caretaker had meticulously recorded each door as if they were distinct phenomena. Some days, the caretaker wrote that door 3 exuded a foul stench of rotting flesh, but the next week, it was door 6 that reeked of stagnant water. The caretaker tried to open these doors, but was never successful. On multiple occasions, the caretaker scrawled lines about hearing a scream that travels from door to door, as if searching for release. Disturbingly, one note insisted that one of the locked doors had been unlocked for an hour, but the caretaker, upon discovering it ajar, faced a sudden wailing that forced him to flee. Returning the next day, the door was locked again, as if from the inside, with no sign of who or what might have undone it. The caretaker's final logs devolved into near hysteria, describing the entire house alive with voices and the presence that grows bolder. The caretaker ended his last entry, stating he would no longer remain. "I cannot endure the screams," he wrote, "and every locked door threatens to break open. Let it remain sealed for someone braver or more foolhardy." A creaking sound in the corridor outside the library snapped Eric's attention back. Carefully, he stepped out, shining his flashlight. The corridor was empty, but from the far end, near that row of locked doors, came a faint scraping. He approached, each step accompanied by his heart pounding in his ears. The scraping grew clearer, maybe nails or something harsh dragging across wood. It emanated from behind door #3 or #4. Hard to pinpoint precisely. Then it ceased. In the silence, a new sound took shape, an exhalation, or maybe the beginnings of a moan. Instinctively, he froze, wondering if staying silent might allow him to hear more. The moan built up gradually, a pitiful, drawn-out cry that resonated in the corridor, brimming with sorrow rather than rage. As it faded, goosebumps erupted along his arms. That might well be the scream, or at least a variant of it that so many had whispered about. Gathering courage, Eric advanced to the door he thought was the source. It was locked as expected, with an old brass knob that refused to turn. The wood was battered, but no single point seemed weak enough for him to break through easily. He pressed his ear close. Nothing but silence. Then a jolt, a sharp rap from inside, as if a hand smacked the door. It was so sudden that he nearly lost his balance. His flashlight beam wavered, casting wild shadows. In the adrenaline of the moment, he shouted, "Who's in there? Are you hurt?" A wave of hush followed. Then a faint sob, or so it seemed, dripping with despair. That was enough. He stumbled backward, feeling an urge to flee. Yet curiosity still anchored him. The caretaker's log, the diaries, the locked doors, something about them spelled out a hidden story he felt compelled to unravel. He retreated to the front foyer, inhaling the stale air and trying to calm his nerves. Outside, the last glimmer of twilight had vanished, replaced by an inky blackness. The mansion's windows gave no sign of light from within, though he guessed a faint glow from his flashlight might flicker in them. Checking his watch, he realized it was near midnight. The perfect hour for haunted illusions, he thought ironically. Had intended to do a thorough exploration, but never anticipated that phenomena this blatant would confront him so soon. The rational side of him insisted to remain, gather evidence. The primal side screamed to exit before the house sealed him in. He decided to remain a bit longer. Why come this far only to flee without further understanding? A narrow hallway behind the grand staircase led toward what presumably was the house's west wing. As he ventured in, the layout grew more labyrinthine. Door after door, some locked, a few open, but leading to empty or half-collapsed spaces. Faint scuff marks indicated prior visitors had come and gone. The sense of dread thickened, as if each step deeper into the west wing brought him closer to a core of the house's malignant presence. Indeed, the caretaker's log had hinted that the west wing was especially active. One locked door at the end of a corridor, just beyond a small arch, drew his eye. The handle was newer, ironically, as though replaced more recently. He tried it, locked of course. But the keyhole was more modern, suggesting someone in the last few decades reinforced it. He crouched, shining the flashlight into the keyhole, only to see blackness. A sudden rustling behind the door made him jerk back. It was reminiscent of cloth scraping across the floor. Then silence. No moan this time, just the sense that something was listening. A wave of claustrophobia pressed upon him. He half expected the door to fling open, but nothing happened. Realizing the time was pushing his stamina, he prepared to retreat to the front foyer to regroup or maybe camp near the entrance for the night. That's when he heard it, a piercing scream that tore through the mansion. Loud, anguished, and echoing in a way that defied physics, as though bouncing off every wall. It sliced through Eric's composure, unleashing a near panic. The sound was neither purely human nor purely animal, but an unholy blend. Then it cut off abruptly. The hush that followed was deafening. His heart hammered, and he caught himself trembling. This must be the famous nightly scream, so raw with sorrow or madness that it felt like a condemnation. He forced himself to breathe, trying to piece together logic. Could it be an actual occupant, trapped or insane, behind these locked doors? But how would they have survived? And how to explain the caretaker's notes about illusions and ephemeral vanishings? Summoning nerve, he retraced his path back to the second-floor corridor with the multiple locked doors. Perhaps if he systematically tapped on each door or called out, he might glean some response. The corridor was dim. He had left a small LED lantern on a sill earlier for extra light, but now it was extinguished. Strange! The battery couldn't have died so fast. The gloom seemed thicker, almost tangible. He approached door #4 again, the one from which had heard moaning earlier. Gently, he pressed his palm against it, feeling the old woods chill. He tried the handle again, locked as ever. Summoning bravery, he said quietly, "I heard you. Can you speak? You need help." At first, no reaction. Then a soft scraping from inside, followed by a whisper so faint he couldn't parse words, but it had a childlike timbre, or maybe it was a woman's voice. He pressed his ear closer, adrenaline skyrocketing. The whisper repeated, still indecipherable. He pictured a tortured soul behind that door, or something malignant imitating a voice. Fear twisted his stomach. Just as he considered stepping away, the handle gave a rattle under his palm. He jerked back in shock. The handle was rotating from the inside. The door, however, did not open. Instead, a violent shudder coursed through it, as if someone forcibly tried to yank it open from within. Then it ceased abruptly. A sob-like exhale emerged, trailing off into silence. He realized he was on the threshold of horror beyond his depth. He turned to flee the corridor, only to see at the far end a fleeting shape in the gloom, small, possibly no taller than a child, slipping around a corner. The shape's motion was unnatural, as though drifting above the floor. His flashlight beam chased after it, but found only emptiness. The corridor's gloom had swallowed it. That must have been the entity or presence that roamed these halls, controlling the locked doors, or perhaps trapped behind them at times. In that moment, he accepted that the house was no mere location for a historical curiosity. It was a nexus of something deeply supernatural and terrifying. Downstairs, a swirl of cold air nearly extinguished his flashlight, forcing him to shield it with his jacket. He realized the front door was only steps away. But upon reaching it, he discovered, shockingly, that it refused to budge. The door, which had opened easily before, now seemed jammed or locked from the outside. Panicked, he yanked the handle, hammered the wood. No movement. He was sealed in. Searching for an alternative, he recalled glimpsing a back entrance in the ground floor hallway. Racing through the gloom, he found it behind the kitchen, but that too was locked or blocked, the knob turning partway, but jammed by something heavy. He tried to budge it, but no success. The house, it seemed, had closed its exits. The caretaker's log did mention something about the mansion locking itself. He was living that horrifying reality. Anxiety soared. He had to find an open window or smash one. Circling the ground floor, he discovered that most windows were boarded or securely latched from outside. The few that weren't had iron bars, Harlow's eccentric design, perhaps for security. Even the glass that remained seemed thick, resistant to frantic attempts to break it with the butt of his flashlight. The mansion was a prison, preventing him from leaving until it decided otherwise. He forced himself to calm down. The caretaker's notes might hold a clue about escaping. In the library, rummaging among the shelves, he found references to a hidden mechanism in the parlor that might open a secret egress. The caretaker had written that in an emergency, certain panels along the parlor's fireplace could be slid aside to reveal a corridor that led outside. Perfect. If that was real, it might be his only exit. So back he went to the parlor, scanning the walls. The fireplace was large, ornate with carved cherubs. He examined each cherub for a hidden latch or switch. Minutes passed. Then, near the mantle's underside, his fingers brushed something metallic. Pressing it, he heard a click. A panel at the fireplace's side slid open an inch, revealing a dark, narrow gap. Relief mingled with dread as the space beyond looked profoundly black. But with no alternative, he stepped in, flashlight leading the way. The passage was cramped, the walls damp, with a stench of rot that made him gag. The caretaker's log described illusions in hidden passageways too, but perhaps that was no more horrifying than the rest of this place. The passage led downward, twisting as though carved haphazardly. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the air became. Water dripped from cracks overhead. At times, he glimpsed old wooden beams that stabilized the tunnel. Then he heard it again, that scream echoing faintly through unseen corridors, reverberating all around him. The acoustics of the subterranean space magnified its anguish, turning it into a cacophony that assaulted his ears. He pushed forward, each step accompanied by the fear that the next corner might reveal some monstrous figure. At last, the passage forked. One route seemed blocked by collapsed rubble. The other sloped upward, presumably leading to some external exit. He advanced, only to find a locked iron gate near the end. The gate's bars were thick, and a heavy padlock hung from its latch. Shining the flashlight around, he located the padlock. It was heavily rusted, but still formidable. Without tools, he'd have little chance of forcing it. There was no sign of a key. Defeat weighed on him. Then, from behind the gate, he heard another moan, close but muffled, as if a presence lurked on the other side. The sense that someone was on the far side of that gate caused his hair to stand on end. Could it be a potential ally or captive? Or a trick? The moan escalated, trembling with heartbreak. Eerie though it was, it also carried a sense of longing. Eric tried speaking. "Hello? Can you hear me? Am trapped here." No coherent reply emerged, just a ragged exhalation, then silence. Something about it, though, felt almost childlike in pitch, reminiscent of the scenario from the caretaker's notes about illusions meant to lure travelers. Fearing a trap, he backtracked, deciding perhaps the caretaker had described yet another hidden route. Before he got far, the padlock rattled spontaneously, as if a hand manipulated it from within. Startled, he spun around, shining the light. The padlock stilled, the gate remains locked. That was enough to confirm that he was not alone. Retreating through the passage, he returned to the parlor. On re-entering the main corridor, he discovered fresh footprints in the dust, small footprints, perhaps child-sized, leading from the corridor's center to an open door that he swore had been locked earlier. Tension soared. Was the entity unlocking certain doors at will? If so, maybe the unlocked door could lead to an exit or a new revelation. Summoning all nerve, he followed those footprints to that door. It opened into a bedroom of some sort, furnished with a battered bed frame and a large wardrobe. A cold draft emanated from an unseen gap or window. But the strangest part was the presence of a child's rocking horse in one corner. The paint peeled, the mane missing, but the rocking horse was clearly out of place in an adult's bedroom. The footprints ended near it. As he approached, the horse moved slightly, a slow rock. At once, an invisible wave of dread thickened the air. Then a faint giggle seemed to echo, though the voice was so warped it could have been a stifled sob. The sense of crossing from fear to outright horror overcame him. He no longer had illusions about bravely unraveling secrets. He needed to leave. Yet the house remained locked. The caretaker's logs had not spelled out a second hidden passage besides the one Head already tried. He felt cornered. Gathering the last vestiges of composure, he decided to systematically search for keys that might open either the front door or the mysterious locked doors. Perhaps if one door could be opened, it might reveal a window or a path out, or at least a phone or something. He rummaged in old drawers, rifled dusty closets, all while his senses stayed on high alert for the ghostly footsteps or the dreaded scream. In a small alcove near the foyer, behind a display case of tarnished silverware, he found a set of old keys hanging on a hook. They looked archaic. One was quite large, another smaller, some bizarre shapes reminiscent of antique trunk keys. The caretaker's log might have mentioned stashing keys, but he couldn't recall exactly. Elation flickered. Maybe these would let him out. He tried them on the front door first. No success. The new locks or jam was beyond these keys. Then he thought of the locked second floor doors. Making his way back up, he tested each key on the doorknobs. The largest key clicked in the lock of door #2, turning with difficulty. Nervous excitement soared as he twisted it fully. The door opened an inch, then jammed on some internal friction. With a push, it finally swung wide, revealing absolute darkness. Stepping inside, he found a room that might have once been a private study, though now it was nearly empty. The walls lined with shelves, half of them collapsed. On the floor was an upright mirror, its glass cracked into a spiderweb pattern. No immediate sign of inhabitants. The lingering gloom, however, felt heavier than normal. Using the flashlight, he spotted something scrawled on the wall in faded chalk or paint. Approaching, he read, "Scream if you hear me." The letters, jagged and childish, implied some occupant had been here, trying to communicate or torment a discoverer. As he processed these words, his reflection in the fractured mirror caught his eye. For an instant, he saw a second shape behind him in the reflection, a small, stooped figure with dark hollows for eyes. Whirling around, the room was empty. Heart pounding, he realized the reflection had vanished. Or was it behind the door? No, the threshold was clear. Another illusions, or an entity flickering between rooms. He forced himself to remain rational, though fear clutched his chest. He retreated to the hallway, deciding to test other keys. The next locked door, #5, accepted the smaller key. Inside was a small, windowless chamber, damp with mold, containing only a rotted wooden chest. The smell of decay stung his nostrils. Opening the chest, he found a tangle of old rags, some with dark stains that might have been blood. That sight unsettled him enough to promptly leave. More locked doors remained, but the tension was unbearable. Yet if each door might reveal a new clue or potential exit, ignoring them wasn't an option. The next door, #8, did not open with any key. The knob rattled but refused to budge. He heard faint whimpers beyond it. That door, ironically, might be the main source of the moans or screams. He tried the entire ring of keys, but none fit. A sense of dread told him that's where the worst secret might lie. The caretaker's log had specifically mentioned door #8, describing unholy shrieking. Possibly behind it lurked the entity's heart. If only he had the missing key, or if it existed. Suddenly, the hush was pierced by the shriek again, emanating from somewhere below, warbling up the corridors. This time it was closer and soared in volume, rattling his eardrums. He doubled over, half expecting the walls to buckle. Then the scream cut off, replaced by echoes that drifted away. Summoning what was left of reason, he realized that the caretaker's log suggested the phenomenon peaked near midnight and that the entity might relax or recede in the small hours before dawn. If that pattern held, he might endure until the house grip loosened. The question was, could he survive whatever manifestations might occur until dawn? He made his way back down to the foyer, hoping to stay near the front door, if only to sense any sign that it might unlock. But the moment he reached the foyer, he found the door parted an inch. Had it been locked? He rushed over. The handle turned. Freed? A rush of hope. He tugged, but the door remained stuck, as though something blocked it from outside. The inch gap revealed only darkness outside. He glimpsed nothing but a swirl of night. Testing it a few times, he realized it wasn't enough to squeeze through. Then, with no explanation, the door slammed shut on its own, nearly catching his hand. Panicked, he retreated. The house was indeed playing with him, or so it seemed. Another metallic clang echoed from the depths of the west wing. He suspected the entity might be hurting him. He recalled the caretaker's phrase, "They slip through walls and lock them behind you." The entire place felt alive with malicious intelligence. At some point, while drifting from corridor to corridor, he found himself in front of a large painting, half clothed in dust. Wiping the dust away with a trembling hand, he revealed a portrait of a woman in early 20th century attire, likely the matriarch of the house. Her dark eyes seemed to follow him, her expression cold and sorrowful. A plaque read Catherine Harlow, 1912. Another memory from diaries suggested Ambrose's wife was named Catherine, so perhaps this was she. But something about the painting's background unsettled him. Painted at her side was a small child, half in shadow, wearing a white dress. The child's face was partially blurred in the style, but its eyes were large, almost doll-like. Not for the first time, he felt a strange parallel to the locked rooms and the sense that the moaning might be mother or child. A sad family tragedy, overshadowed by spiritual torment. But the caretaker's references to illusions and monstrous manifestations indicated a possibility that the phenomenon was more demon than ghost. Fatigue and fear pressed on him as hours dragged closer to midnight. The moans recurred sporadically, interspersed with fleeting glimpses of shapes scuttling at the end of corridors. Then, near what might have been the dining hall, he encountered a locked steel door that looked out of place in a Victorian mansion. Possibly installed by a later occupant, it hinted at something requiring serious security. He tested his ring of keys once more. One partially engaged. With effort, it turned. The door creaked open to reveal a small, windowless room lined with shelves containing old ledgers he recognized as historical or financial logs, and an ornate trunk in the center. The trunk's lid was slightly ajar, revealing the corner of a metallic object. Approaching, he discovered it was a set of heavy bolt cutters, caked in dust but seemingly intact. Perfect. Perhaps he could cut the chain or padlock or hinge on an exit. A surge of hope flickered. He grabbed the bolt cutters. Then his flashlight illuminated the trunk's interior further. Scattered among the tools were old photographs of children, each black and white, some with scratched-out faces. The sense of an unwholesome undertone soared. He quickly took the cutters and left the trunk as it was. A plan formed. If the front or back door had chain locks, or if the gate in the hidden passage was padlocked, these cutters might be enough to free him. With renewed urgency, he dashed back to the hidden passage near the parlor. The path down was the same, leading to the branching corridor with the blocked route and the locked iron gate. The padlock was there, large and corroded. Carefully, he positioned the bolt cutters around it, applying pressure. For a few tense seconds, the metal resisted. Then, with a shriek of snapping steel, the lock gave way. Relief soared. He yanked open the gate. A wave of stale, fetid air rushed out, bringing with it an undercurrent of something decaying. The corridor beyond was low-ceilinged, sloping upward. If it indeed led outside, freedom might be just around the bend. He advanced, choking on the rancid stench. Another door, this time not locked, swung open at the corridor's end. He stepped through, only to find himself not outside, but in a sub-level chamber thick with shadows. Flicking the flashlight around revealed piles of debris, moldy crates, and a small flight of stone steps that might lead upward to an exit. However, his light caught something else, a cluster of child-sized footprints in the dust, leading to the chamber's far corner. There, half hidden behind a collapsed beam, he glimpsed a small figure. At first, it seemed just a doll, broken-limbed, contorted. Then it moved, slow, deliberate. It lifted its head, the porcelain surface fractured in multiple places, an expression of silent, heart-stopping malevolence. He realized with horror that the shape matched the rumor, a childlike entity, but clearly unnatural, with glimmering black eyes set in a cracked face. It stepped forward with unnerving smoothness, each movement causing a faint scraping like ceramic on stone. Eric's mind raced. Was this indeed a physical manifestation or a projection of the house's nightmares? The figure parted its lips in a silent hiss, revealing not normal porcelain, but darkness within. Reflex spurred him backward, nearly tripping. The entity advanced a step, and he sensed a wave of cold wash over him, as though it exhaled an arctic breath. In that instant, the memory of the caretaker's log about illusions, moaning behind locked doors, and childlike shapes soared back. The presence, presumably the root of the screams, had found him. For a moment, he stood petrified. The figure let out a stifled cry, half laugh, sending a jolt of primal terror through his core. Summoning the last shred of rationality, Eric realized he had to get away. The stone steps behind him might lead out if he was lucky. The entity lunged forward in a series of jerky, unnatural steps. He turned and ran, nearly stumbling in the darkness, heading for those steps. He scrambled upward, hearing the scraping steps behind him, each tap echoing with horrifying clarity. The steps ended in a wooden hatch. He lifted it with all his might. For a moment, it stuck, but with a final heave, it gave way. A swirl of cool night air hit him as he emerged into what seemed to be the overgrown backyard of the mansion. The entity's footsteps behind him grew louder, a final moan erupting from below. He threw the hatch shut, saw no obvious latch, so he jammed a nearby rock onto it, then scrambled through the yard. The yard was overshadowed by tall hedges, but at least there was open sky overhead. He navigated around the side of the house. Miraculously, there were no bars on a window at ground level, a sign of a partial collapse. He managed to climb over debris, reaching the front yard. The front gate, still half open, beckoned. He sprinted for it, half expecting the locked door phenomenon to replicate outside as well. But the gate parted easily, letting him out onto the driveway, which led to the road. Only once he was beyond the property line did he realize he could truly breathe. Looking back, he saw no sign of pursuit, just the mansion's silhouette framed by a faint moonlight. In the distance, he heard the final echo of that heart-wrenching scream, as if a farewell from the entity or a cry of frustration at losing its prey. Collapsing against a tree on the roadside, he tried to steady his shaking hands. Hours later, at dawn's first glow, he mustered the strength to gather his notes, leave the region, and vow never to set foot near Oakwood House again. Over the following weeks, he penned a lengthy account of what had witnessed: the caretaker's diaries, the locked doors, the moans in the corridors, the fleeting glimpses of the childlike figure with a cracked porcelain face. He circulated his narrative among a small circle of archivists and paranormal investigators. Some found his story compelling, but perhaps too outlandish. Others recognized the parallels with old rumors. Over time, word spread, fueling a new wave of caution around Oakwood House. Still, the mansion stands, perched in that lonely location, overshadowed by centuries of secrets. The locked doors remain, presumably still sealed, though who knows if the entity occasionally unlocks them for its own purpose. The scream behind locked doors echoes on, unstoppable. Locals who once dismissed the phenomenon as myth might glance anxiously at the house on stormy nights, half expecting an ear-splitting cry to tear across the winds. Meanwhile, curiosity seekers arrive from time to time, ignoring warnings. They seldom linger. The estate's curse, if indeed it be that, continues. Behind each locked door, a moan, a sob, or a silent shake that might or might not be real, each step sowing fresh terror in the hearts of those who dare approach. So ends the account of The Scream Behind Locked Doors, inexplicable noises in the abandoned mansion. Perhaps the scariest aspect is the knowledge that the house is not truly vacant. It harbors a presence or presences that neither time nor neglect can exorcise. The caretaker's attempts, the locked doors serving as feeble barriers, the illusions of a childlike wraith with cracked porcelain features, it all accumulates into a haunting that defies rational explanation. Each locked door may contain a fragment of the building's malignant spirit, or a portal to deeper horrors, sealed for the protection of any soul wandering within. The moans, the screams, the ephemeral sightings of a small figure, they converge into a tapestry of dread that ensures Oakwood House will remain a taboo place in local lore for decades to come. The question stands: does the phenomenon seek release, or does it feed on the terror of intruders, perpetuating itself generation after generation? For now, the house stands silent by day, whispering by night, its locked doors keeping in secrets that only the bravest or the most foolish would attempt to unveil. The caretaker's logs speak from the past, cautioning that once you hear the wail behind those locked doors, you may never quite escape the memory. And that might be the final truth of the place: the idea that some horrors once glimpsed can never be locked away again in the recesses of the mind.